Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, and welcome to another edition of The Third Round, America's premier and foremost bar-based political talking heads program. I'm your host, Pat Clark, and I want to make this special offer on today's show. Anyone who is interested in Everybody Vote May 15th paraphernalia, give us a shout. This is posted on, don't you post this on one of those internet blog things? So you can blog, and if you want some swag, no, that's swag. It's called swag. Yeah. You can get buttons, stickers, posters. We got posters, and we also have. No, I won't. We ain't giving that out. We ain't got it to give. And shoits. We got May 15 shoits. Give us a holler. We'll give them out for free. Ours is a nonpartisan voter engagement project. But enough with that. And on to opinionated discussions. Today's guests on the third round for the first time this election season, Ms. Katherine Fink.
Hi.
Noted
whose
voice.
face is well known to everybody.
Noted voice.
Who listens to WDUQ.
Look at it.
That's right.
There you go. The mystery is off now. There you are. Chris Potter, who people are all too familiar with his look, I'm sure, and City Paper, editor emeritus of City Paper, and Khari Mosley, state director for the League of Young Voters. So, without further ado, let's just dive right in. Top story this week, I guess, would probably have to be the indictments, right? How can you miss that one? Local council person has heard from local district attorney, and not an endorsement. What do you think of that?
You're speaking, of course, of Tawanda Carlisle.
I'm sorry, we should have narrowed it down somewhat, perhaps, but
the
yes.
incumbent city councilor from District 9, who was just indicted on a slew of corruption-related charges. That's how we've decided to shorthand it in the media, I suppose, corruption-related charges.
The word kickback came into play, as I recall.
Right, yes. Well, apparently what Ms. Carlisle is alleged to have done is to have given out money that her office has to use to give it to people who are nominally consultants. I'll do it this way, consultants, who just by a strange coincidence happen to be friends of hers, for various and sundry tasks. And then within a day or two of cutting invoices and checks for this work, Ms. Carlisle was depositing amounts of cash into her own bank account, suggesting that the whole thing was just an elaborate scheme so she could pay money to somebody else so they could give money to her, and then she could cash it in and pay off her whopping credit card bill, I guess, is the allegation. Anyway.
Yeah, upon finding out this, I was shocked that I had received any level of money from city council people in the past without actually residing with a member of their family. But, I guess it is possible.
That's true. That being the man, Lee Otto Johnson, I believe his name is, who lives with Carlisle's mother.
Constance Parker.
Who came up with the health study. Should I put health study?
You should.
In quotes. Which I have not read it myself, but apparently is mostly a compilation of other studies.
As many of the best studies in Allegheny County have been, frankly, and at much higher prices, I might add.
Right. Yeah. So actually, this study was actually borrowed heavily from two sources. One, the University of Pittsburgh Center for Social and Urban Research had done a bunch of studies on black and white disparities in healthcare, economics, and everything else. It also borrowed, and this is something that we at City Paper broke, it also borrowed heavily from the teachings of a Christian sect that believes in faith healing. And so I guess the idea was it was supposed to study disparate impacts in healthcare, and it was borrowed heavily from this language from faith healers. So basically in District 9, just pray yourselves to wellness, my friends, and maybe you can just sort of like miracle those potholes to be filled, and everything will be okay there in District 9. What's interesting about this to me is that there is this whole question of whether Ms. Carlisle, who is of course running for re-election on May 15th, whether Ms. Carlisle can be reelected.
I'm gonna have to take
most people turn those off.
Ms. Carlisle now.
We are in so much shit right now.
What are you doing? This is anonymous all over again.
I told you we weren't mentioning that name.
At any rate, there are several people running for this seat against Ms. Carlisle, and there was actually just a campaign event, a debate, a few days before we're broadcasting here, where she showed up and people were just like coming up to her and sort of hugging her and giving her their sympathy. One of the candidates in the race gave her a big hug. Judith Ginyard gave Tawanda Carlisle a big hug. And at this event, Ms. Carlisle said, one of the responsibilities we have on city council is to make sure that every dollar is spent, for the best interests of the city. Like, it's just like, I have to say that I admire this.
Wow.
To be able to go up after all that and
I
just be
believe
like, we have a fiduciary
That's
responsibility.
called chutzpah, I
It's
believe.
called, yes, in a different city council district, it would be called chutzpah.
Wow.
District
But
5.
it will be interesting, though, since there are so many candidates in that race,
Right.
whether that will be a factor in, how this whole thing turns out. If she will get enough sympathy votes, ultimately, along with just her regular supporters to keep her in office. Because how many candidates are there? 7, 8, something like that?
I think there's 7 opponents. She has 7 opponents at this point. So
And, we all know what the turnout is in council elections to start with.
Right.
It's pretty dismal. So it would really only take a few people to turn it.
And in this same race, of course, there was Rachel Cooper, who had won the party endorsement and the hearts of a lot of progressive folks I know in the pro-choice community and elsewhere, who then got bounced from the ballot because she had trouble filing her
And
paperwork.
any
correctly.
discussion? I know that Councilman Peduto came out and said I am not an independent on Friday, but any word from Ms. Cooper on whether or not she's going to run an independent candidacy?
I don't think so. I haven't heard anything. She's supposedly still trying to challenge. The last I heard, she was still trying to overturn the judge's decision to remove her from the ballot. I actually don't know if anything's changed since then, but that's where she was. So it's been a wild and wacky ride in District 9.
And I'm presuming the councilwoman will not be stepping down in spite of the overwhelming pressure coming from a council president and a mayor who both say, "Hey, not our call."
Yeah, pretty bold. No, the latest that I've heard is no plans to resign.
They did, however, this is my favorite. They did. The mayor is now calling for the ethics board to be convened at last. This is for
Oh, gads, what, 8 years later?
right, exactly. This is the ethics board, which has not met in
Some
a decade and
indications
a
that
half.
ethics are suddenly relevant. then.
Right. So now you said, in light of these developments, we will have the ethics board convene. What's interesting about this is the ethics board is supposed to have 5 members, one of whom resigned several months ago. The city code says really clearly, if somebody resigns and they were a mayoral appointment, as this person was, the mayor has 60 days to come up with the name of somebody else and give that name to city council to approve. We are well past 60 days, and no 5th member has been suggested by the mayor's office. I just talked to the mayor's office late last week, and they still don't have a name.
We actually heard on Friday, because we talked to Sister Patrice Hughes, who's on the board, and we interviewed her in the morning, and by afternoon she made a point to call us back and say, I just heard from the mayor's office that he's going to have a name on Monday.
Okay. All
With
right.
the goal of city council approving the person this week, and with a tentative date of, I think, this coming Friday for
Right.
the ethics board.
Will the
Still too late.
Will the Young People's Commission have a chance to weigh in on this appointment?
Yeah, they're going to get a 19-year-old for the ethics board. I don't know. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that, and I had just spoken to Dick Scringer, the city press guy, at about 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and he was sort of like, we're going to try to get somebody early next week, but it's too late. I mean, the city code is very clear on this. It's 60 days. That is long
What
since
happens
elapsed.
after 60 days? Does the
Nothing.
public get to put on
Yeah,
somebody
right.
on the board?
Nothing. Obviously
Nothing.
the board was dormant for how many years? I don't know.
Again, a tribute to those the fine work of commissions in our
Right, and the
our
fine work of
esteemed city.
oversight being done by city council these days, thanks to the intrepid leadership of the folks we have on there now.
It took a long time just to get new members appointed to the ethics board in the first place. When
Right.
this came up last year, city council members were supposed to come up with names, and some of them came up with names of people who had to be disqualified for various reasons. And it's like, well, I'll name that person anyways.
So do
How
we,
seriously are you taking
well,
this?
well, begging the question, are ethics at all going to be an issue in any campaign, or does it take 2 or 3 people on elected office to be under indictment before that happens?
I don't know, Khari.
I don't think it's going to be a big issue. I think, most people aren't really that tuned into what's going on right now. The lack of high-profile races and, overall kind of, I think, a sense of kind of almost political fatigue, with 3 mayors in the past year and a half. I think, and then I think a general feeling among the front runners to not want to have a debate.
Right.
You know what I mean? And want to, almost go in autopilot mode and just move along. I think Dan Honorado made a comment about the distraction of elections, and we don't need that distraction.
Right.
And
Jim
let-
Furlow as well. We needed breathing space. We just kind of need space to breathe and sort of recover from all that democracy we've been having lately.
What I hope is that there's not a sort of corruption fatigue, which I kind of feel like sometimes. I mean, certainly everyone's paying
Excellent
attention to the
point.
Swanda Carlisle charges, but there was
We
also
so soon forget Cyril Wecht.
Cyril Wecht, Sheriff DeFazio. I mean,
you're right. It's all right. We
it's-
already have 2 or 3. You're right. So
I mean,
the
there's-
question
there's
is, do we
such
have to get the 6 or
cynicism.
7 elected officials before corruption?
right. I mean, I think there's such cynicism already about, that's the way government is, and, people just kind of expect that every so often there are going to be charges against public officials. And as someone who's not a native of Pittsburgh, I found that to be really surprising that there was this sort of corruption fatigue as I saw it. And I think that reflects on how seriously people take the Ethics Hearing Board. I mean, I think if public officials were to put more of an emphasis on its importance, then people might start to get the message that, oh, somebody really is trying to clean things up.
Yeah, although
Well, and I think it's important to state first that these are, of course, all at this point allegations.
In the Carlisle case, not in the DeFazio case, that's settled.
right, yeah, that's true. I mean, I would
And
have to
Wecht
say,
is still
I would have to
pending.
say that part of the issue here as well is that there's just not. It was a little unclear with the kickback thing. Now we've kind of gone to a different level with Ms. Carlisle and her situation. But originally, the allegation was she basically sent contract jobs to people with no qualifications to do the work except that they were her friends. And it could have been plausibly argued that really there's nothing that prevents her from doing that. City councilors have a wide amount of discretion about how they spend the money allocated
Draperies,
to their office.
for example.
Exactly. Draperies, as I recall, Gene Riccardi, former city council president, framing, spent
Lots of
thousands of
framing.
dollars on framing.
Smoke
So-
eaters.
Yeah, smoke eaters in Darlene Harris's office. Yeah.
These are the issues that drive this city.
That's a really good point, though. I mean, that's been an issue that has come up and has been written about over the years, and unfortunately it hasn't really stuck. I mean, it's kind of come to people's attention, and they'll forget about it in the next week. But I do wonder whether the Carlisle case will bring about changes. with
Yeah,
that.
you hope so. I mean, to borrow from you, you just said something that sparked a recollection in my mind, which is that the mayor's office is also in violation of another city code provision, which is that there's not supposed to be any acting director in a department for more than 90 days
yeah.
before that person's name is submitted to city council for approval. The city solicitor, George Spector, who's a very nice man, I've met him, he's a good person, has been serving in that capacity for, I think, 8 months or something
Yeah.
like that. He is still the acting city solicitor. It's a total violation of the city code,
Right
and it's
there.
also worth knowing. What are you showing me?
All we have to do is dial 311,
dial
my friend.
311.
We dial 311, let them know,
Right.
and they'll rat it out.
Well, here's the thing: is the Tribune Review, I believe in January, did a story on this, partly because some bloggers were making an issue of this. Is when are you going to put? I actually asked George Spector at about that same time. I asked Spector and Dick Scringer as well. When are you going to make this guy your solicitor? There's no question that if his name was put before council would approve it. So it's not like they're running scared from anything. They just don't seem to like. It's just not a priority for them. Here's this law. So I mean, I guess my point is,
You mean
here's
the
this
laws
law.
are not a priority?
Here's this right
Actual
exactly. Here's this
statutes
city code. There's not a lot of room
in
for
the
like.
code of
there's
the
not
law
a
of
lot
the
of
land.
like. Right. There's not a lot of like. How do we interpret this cryptic piece of legislation? It's like 90 days. You got 90 days, and then you got to do something.
To be fair, if they
What
don't
about
have
a
a
leap year?
solicitor, how are they going to find out about these laws? They probably
So
don't
that
have
was-
any lawyers
I
on
was talking
staff.
to a city person. They were like, I guess you'd have to ask the city solicitor about that. I was like, so I have to ask the city solicitor about what the law is applying to the city solicitor's job. I mean, the thing that just cracks me up is that the Trib does this story about it, and the mayor's office says, well, we're gonna look into this. We're gonna take this very seriously. It's something we obviously have to do. And here we are now, 3 months later, and it still hasn't happened. And there's just this question, I think, for those of us in the media, but also for people in the public. We report on this stuff, and then it's just like dropping a stone down a well, and you just sort of wait for the splash. And here we are, 3 months later, and we still haven't heard it. We still haven't heard the sound of anything having an impact.
And the Ethics Hearing Board, I should note as well, came up when there were still 2 Democrats in the mayor's race.
Right.
And then it became a battle between the 2 candidates to see who could call the Ethics
Who could
Hearing Board
convene it
first.
Right.
And then after Peduto dropped out, then the issue died as well, and it's only resurfaced
Right.
because of the Carlisle charges.
Right. There's this feeling that I think you have to be like be after these guys every day of the week and twice on Sundays, and yet we do that, and then there's not, outside of a very small group of bloggers, reporters, and a handful of other activists, there's just not a sense that these issues have any traction with people in the city as a whole.
Yeah, but I think the issue is, I mean, not to be completely cynical, but I think
Go ahead, be completely cynical.
to be honest, like
We'll leave that to us.
a lot of Pittsburghers, who are like real true blue Pittsburghers, a lot of them feel like, hey, if I was there, I'd have did the same thing.
Right.
Like I heard that a lot of times over the past week, when you talk about the Carlisle case in detail, they say, hey, I would have did the same thing. Or, when Luke went to New York, oh, that's cool. I would have loved to go to New York. Like, who gets to go to New York on a private plane, and hang out with billionaires and have dinner at nice restaurants? So to them, like, a lot of Pittsburghers, it's part of the culture, kind of like to get over and, have your cousin get you a job and settle into a very comfortable situation that you don't really have to work that hard for. So I think a lot of people, even with who's a good friend of mine now, Ben Woods, he's still a hero on the north side. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of negativity, even though it was 20 years ago, and I think everybody should get a second chance. And I think, that was '89, so that was 20 years ago. But still, a part of it almost, as a result of he did it, a lot of people respect him and like him even more. Like, yeah, like that was slick. We got over on the man. So I think part of it is that mentality that you'll see in Pittsburgh, where people feel like I would have did the same thing.
You might want to give some background for our viewers as far as what happened with Ben Woods.
Oh,
Why that's an issue.
Well, Ben Woods was convicted, of misuse of public office back in '89, and usually when you talk about corruption in public office, his name comes up time and time again. But he's a good friend of mine. I think he's a good guy. North side all the way. Ben Woods. That's my guy.
Well, and I just happen to be.
That was very nice, right to the
And
camera.
it was
I-
totally
I-
sincere.
I have, yeah, absolutely. I have to be now reading a biography of Harry S. Truman, and finding out that at one point during a campaign in the the previous aughts, his daughter actually was nearly kidnapped from his home for partisan political purposes. So we've really come a long way, at least in that part of Missouri. But anyway, so now that we've gotten through this whole reform issue, and pretty much thrown it by the wayside, we do have some actual council races going on in our city, county as well. But we'll get to those at a future episode. Do you think this is a viable issue outside of Ms. Carlisle's district in races?
Ethics per se?
Ethics per se, and you were saying that there was some movement when there was the competitive race for mayor in who was going to convene the ethics commission first, or actually acknowledge or even recognize that it exists. Is this something that can even be brought up in, say, some of the other district races?
I don't know. I'm not sure that has come up in other council races. My council is Council District 3, which does have Jeff Cook running against Bruce Krause, and they ran against each other before. And as far as I know, that has not been an issue. I'm a Southsider, so everyone's talking about the bars.
So it's all about vomiting.
It's
in
really
your
all about the
district.
vomit and the bars and the piss and the yelling and garbage.
That's really any political race, honestly.
But usually not involving the candidates.
But you're not seeing ethics questions coming up between these two guys, Krause. And
No, it hasn't really, as far as I've heard, is that issue itself. Of course, I mean, this is still, a pretty new thing with the charges coming out against
Right.
Carlisle. So, I mean, perhaps the discussion.
Public safety again and again comes up in quality of life, but public safety is an issue, whether it's throwing up or essentially throwing people off bridges or buildings. I mean, these are real issues. Maybe not the throwing people off buildings, but public safety
I
is
hadn't heard
an
about that.
issue. Well, I was,
Interaction.
the Empire State Building thing the other day, but that's a different city. But public safety is something that has to do with, say, like delivery of basic government services. And, when you have, I don't know, a lot of money spent on draperies and things like that, in opposition to something about like paying attention to how or why people get police services and
I'll
how
tell you-
effectively it's done, those are real issues.
The race
for
where that
people.
really surprises me is in the city controller's race, which is perhaps, you would think that this is the only other citywide race other than mayor, which is no longer a race because Bill Peduto dropped out. You've got a bunch of guys, city controllers, whose very job it is to audit not just the city's finances, but also the performance of political safety,
Right.
of the public safety, of public works, of all these other issues. And I've watched these guys. I think there's 5 of them running for this seat, and I've watched them, and they're all real nice guys, and they're all very polite to each other. None of them, that as far as I've seen, and I've gone to a couple campaign events, none of them are really saying anything along the lines of, you know what this office needs, the city controller office, it needs somebody to act as a check against the mayor's office. None of them are really coming out on that issue, and it surprises me because you've got a 27-year-old mayor with, in the short period of time that he's been mayor, a somewhat checkered series of decisions on his part. Clearly, city council is not going to be the check, against, the check and balance kind of thing. Clearly, it's not going to be city council. If I was running for city controller, and thank God I'm not, but if I was running, I'd be saying, you really need somebody to kind of keep this mayor's office honest and to really kind of evaluate the performance of what they're doing, the performance of public safety, the performance of public works, really study who's getting the services and who's not. And they're doing that a little bit, but it's not, nobody's really come out and saying, we've got a 27-year-old mayor who may or may not know what he's actually doing, but in any case could certainly benefit from some outside voices kind of telling him where he's stepping wrong. And I assume that the reason that's not happening is largely because Mayor Ravenstahl is so popular. I almost really slipped there. Is so popular in the
That was going to
city
be my
of Pittsburgh.
question. Would you really want to run that way? Because, how
Well,
politically popular
Say
would
for
that
example, Mayor Ravenstahl, or any mayor at this point who happened to be 27 years old, said, encasing the city in a glass dome, that's my vision for the future.
Sure.
Who is it that's going to bring him back to, say, some level of actuality? Is the city council?
Not the
I
building
think the court of
trades.
public opinion.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, wait, did you say the court of public opinion?
Yeah.
But if there's no election, then we got to wait, like, how many years for that court of public opinion to be convened
two.
again?
I just think that's where we're at right now. I mean, the guy, like, 8.5 out of 10 people in the city, or at least voters, have a positive opinion of
And
who
who
the
is
guy
that
is.
half person?
I don't know.
No, it's one person who's like halfway, like hasn't made up his mind.
Gotcha.
That's it.
And and I think, until that changes, he has so much political capital at this point. He can decide who he wants to talk to, who he doesn't want to talk to, and what he wants to do. Now there's not an election for 2 years. I mean, over that period of time, people have to begin to get a different image of him, or someone who's really smart with a good PR, operation could begin to chink away at the armor. But I think it would have to be a very deliberate and very smart, intentional activity that someone would have to do. But at this point, he's so popular that he's really invincible.
I still think, though, within this city controller's race, the guy who I would think would be the most likely person to do something like this, to sort of run against Luke Ravenstahl, would probably be Mike DeWita. Here, I don't expect Tony Pecora, who's the current acting city controller, to do it. I wouldn't expect Doug Shields to do it for a variety of reasons. Michael Lamb, the endorsed Democrat, is clearly not going to run against the party structure. But here's Mike DeWita, who in many ways is sort of styling himself as this sort of progressive guy who's standing up for the African American constituency, who's standing up for the kind of low-income constituency, is really trying to position himself as this progressive, and maybe hoping that those other guys, Shields and the rest, divide up the kind of party line vote between them.
Right.
Maybe he can kind of sneak in and do that. And yet even he isn't doing that. And I find that significant and interesting, because it just shows the extent to which political discourse has just been completely neutered this election. Outside of the mayors, it's just not happening in council races or anywhere else.
How many people are in the controller's race?
Five.
Five.
Yeah.
So we posited perhaps having, and this would be an open shout out to those 5 candidates. It would be great to have you join us here at Gooski's on a Sunday and talk about those various issues that you are addressing or that we're ignorant of.
Shields
how
is
you're
actually passed
addressing.
out underneath the pool table right behind
But,
us.
These are all allegations at this time. No, I think that would be a good thing to bring in front of them. We'll have to get a bigger table, maybe a couple of microphones. But
And also, I think with Mike DeWita, one of the stories that Mike DeWita has told, I've heard him tell on the campaign trail, is that he was looking at running for mayor, and he did a poll, and it showed that Ravenstahl is really popular.
Right.
And then he went to his church he grew up in, and was talking to one of the nuns, and he was telling one of the nuns, like, I want to run for mayor. and the nun who he had been an altar boy there, she's like 85. She had watched him grow up, into a man in his late 50s now, and she told him that she was with Ravenstall, and if he ran, she was still going to support Ravenstall. And this is the nun who had raised him and knew him all of his life. And you can't even imagine a person that you could have a closer, intimate, personal connection with, who would go with you out of loyalty. And it was just like that type of popularity that I think.
This was a button I found in my pocket last night that I think really pretty much sums up the entire mayoral politics. Ask me about my grandkids.
He's the mayor.
Exactly. He is now the mayor. So.
Now, the other race we should mention briefly is, of course, Len Bodak, the incumbent against Patrick Dowd, the challenger in District 7, which is actually the very district we are sitting in.
And my understanding is that invitations have actually gone out to the candidates in the form of discussions and pointed discussions, inviting them to join us here.
I don't know that Mr. Bodak has been formally invited, but a reporter
formally.
from the city paper basically
invite
said Mr. Dowd's campaign had talked to organizers here at the table about this and said, I would be happy. Yes, exactly. He said, I would be happy to come in and talk about the race. And so a reporter at the city paper asked Mr. Bodak about this, and Mr. Bodak said, I don't campaign in bars, which would make him the first Pittsburgh Democrat in human history, I think, who could make that statement, as a matter of fact. But if it's true, God bless him, I say. But at any rate, I mean, this is sort of an example, I think, that a lot of people who, since Bill Peduto is out of the race, now kind of looking for some place to expend their energies, or at least their hopes. And I think that this race is one of them. A lot of people are really hoping that Pat Dowd can kind of score a point against the political machine by beating Leonard Bodak here in District 7.
Because they have been allies, certainly. I mean, and friends, I believe, right? Pat Dowd and Bill Peduto.
Yeah, I mean, they're part of the same big movement. Yeah, so I think they're at least kind of ideological, kinsfolk. Is that a word, kinsfolk?
I think you have to be careful of the use of the phrase "big movement." Frankly, but
it's an aspiration more than a.
But all right. So final thoughts. We got about 4 minutes. Am we missing anything here?
This is Don Imus's fault.
Yes. All right. So let's go. First of all, let me start with the hair. Let me start with the wig.
Wait, Donnie Iris?
The only relevance this has is the city of Pittsburgh is that woman with the amazing wig, who is
Constance Parker.
Exactly.
And I hold that that's her real hair. I don't care.
Could be.
This
Well,
is
if it's her real hair,
I have
all
a certain
props
amount of
to her.
expertise on.
But she brought up Don Imus recently in a local political context.
Yes.
Right.
I think the most interesting thing actually has nothing to do with Connie Parker, but actually, if you caught Meet the Press this morning, they had Gwen Eiffel on there,
awesome.
who have made some very pointed remarks, actually called out
Who's
Tim Russert,
Gwen Eiffel?
Gwen Eiffel from PBS, the Washington.
She does Washington Week, and she was a former New York Times reporter
okay.
who Don Imus had crapped on years ago.
Yeah.
And basically said, the New York Times is a wonderful paper that they give their cleaning lady a job, reporting the news.
This is
So
legitimate payback.
She had a personal 15-year-old thing about this guy.
Exactly.
And so she goes on
Meet the Press,
and basically Russert has been a guest many times.
like once a week, like.
On the Imus show, it's basically I don't know what you thought you were
Sucking
doing.
on that tea, the big media
She
tea.
called everybody here has been on there or was silent, after years and years, and she was like, I was out front for years, talking about the material and the content, and she said, the reason why it actually became an issue, which I think is an interesting issue, is now that because of more diversity in corporate America, there's a lot of African Americans or vice presidents, middle management, upper management in these corporations, and they're the ones that put the pressure on. And 10 years ago, when the comments were said about her, African Americans weren't in those positions of power, but now they are.
You got the president of American Express's board. You've got somebody who's on the board of CBS, calling vocally and on
Genial weatherman Al Roker.
Al Roker was tearing him a new asshole.
Don Imus's head.
God bless Al Roker.
Exactly right.
And I got to say, this is something that Willard Scott would not have been able to take the moral lead on. All props to Willard. But Al, I mean, it's a weird little paradigm, but absolutely true. Al had a national audience, and the fact that he could come out and say not working too well for me.
I think there locally, jumping back to the local thing here, I think that what Ms. Parker said, I've certainly heard folks, and I live in District 9, and I've certainly heard some folks there say, what Tawanda did was wrong. but she's not the only one to do it.
Yeah.
And the reason she got caught, or the reason she's getting prosecuted, is because she's a black female. And I mean, I think that's a more, nobody's saying that she got set up or anything like that. It's not, nobody's saying that these things were fabricated, but they're saying that something is wrong with the way the law is being applied.
When only one of the men in the gang rape really gets prosecuted, yeah, I can see the injustice in that.
I have to say, getting back to an earlier point, I do think that the rules governing council spending are not particularly useful. I mean, they're really vague. They're really open-ended.
Was that word? They're not particularly robust.
Robust is an excellent word for it. So, in that sense, I mean, I still think that, and the reason I think for voting against, I'm not one of those people who thinks like, $10 here, $10 there, somebody using somebody's parking permit or whatever. Is like, a lot of times we get caught up on these issues that aren't particularly significant. I think there are very good reasons to vote against Tawanda Carlisle, and I think prominently because I can't think of a single major piece of legislation that she has proposed to City Council. I don't think her district is being served well at all by her being in that office, and I think that's a really strong reason to vote her out of office, regardless of what you think about these other ethics issues. But there is a broader issue there, which is we do not do a very good job of policing politicians of any race or color whatsoever, and I think that because of that, we as a political culture open ourselves up to this kind of conspiracy sort of rumor mongering that's like, oh, you singled her out. Yeah. Because it is the rules are so wide open that it inevitably seems arbitrary when somebody gets nailed.
When you've got an entire bowl, why do you have to pick out that turd? Essentially, when you're talking about political corruption in a city,
I think it goes both ways. I mean, obviously there's a historical precedent, and there's definitely a historical legacy of African Americans. Getting pointed out, getting the short end of the stick, so to speak. But also there's a historical legacy within the African American community to know that, when you are of African American, whether right or wrong, it's the way my father told me, my grandparents, everybody, that you're not going to have the same leeway. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That like, the white boys may be in there, they might be smoking crack, on the 5th floor.
Right.
But you're black and that as soon as you mess up, they're going to be on your ass quicker than they're going to be on everybody else's. So that's not fair. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But in our community, in our tradition, in our cultural tradition, like you're taught that. Don't think you're just going to go in there and do anything because you're going to be the first one to go. So I think there's part of that too, But there probably is some unfairness somewhere deep in there. We could probably go through the annals of City Council and find a number of
let's not do that.
Of politicians that did the wrong
thing. Let's not go through the annals of City Council.
Well, that's next week's program.
You gotta watch your back. You can't. You gotta be careful. So.
Well, and with that caution, be careful. We'll end this episode of the third round. Why must you all laugh at me? And with this caution, again, be careful out there. We bid you adieu from the high atop Polish Hill, and hope you'll tune in for next week's episode of The Third Round. Thank you. Only 3 minutes over. We're never going to make it.